All right, let's begin to take our seats. I feel incredibly bad about interrupting good conversations, because this is surely, I shouldn't say surely, because we're going to have an awesome panel after this, but I was going to say this is surely the most valuable part of the day, is the connections that you're able to make, the introductions that you're able to make. And so thank you very, very much for being here. I'm Carl Schultz, the provost at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you, particularly to those who've traveled from elsewhere in the state to be here. We have people here today from 16 counties. Of course, we have our Dane County residents, but then we have colleagues here from Brown, Dodge, Eau Claire, Iowa, Juneau, Manitowoc, Marquette, Milwaukee, Racine, Oneida, Outagamie. I practiced pronouncing that for quite a while this morning. Portage, Sauk, Washington, and Waukesha. So thank you all very, very much for making the trip. Thank you also to those who are taking time out of their day to watch the live stream. It's great to be able to connect with you, even though you can't be with us in Madison today, so thank you very much. I also like to say thank you in particular to 3 people who have led the effort to make this conference happen. So right in front of me, studiously studying his notes, is Dean Carl Martin of the Division of Extension and Public Media. Carl, and then right in front of me, Dean Diana Hess from the School of Education, and Dr. Danielle Hairston Green, Director of the Extension's Human Development and Relationships Institute. So thank you all. So thank you very much for your work. The return of cooperative extension to its historic home at UW-Madison is really an exciting event, because it's giving us great opportunities both to deepen and broaden the work of Extension and UW-Madison. This is the proverbial win-win opportunity. The promise is enormous. Extension is embedded throughout the state. It's in all 72 of our counties. They've had a tremendous history of fantastic work. And it's been 50 years nearly that Extension has been apart from UW-Madison. I love what's happening at UW-Madison as well. And so the challenge before us is to bring together the 2 organizations, as I say, in a win-win fashion. And that's what today is all about. This event is the 3rd in a series we're hosting to bring together our researchers, educators on campus, with community specialists and outreach colleagues from Extension. The goal is to learn about issues and the work that we're already doing, to explore how we might expand that work, and to tap new possibilities for collaboration. The first 2 events for this series focused on opioid addiction and water quality. Participants in both events learned about resources they hadn't known about. They came up with new ideas about how to approach their work, and perhaps most importantly, they connected with a community of people who are working on the same issues. As one Extension colleague from Douglas and Ashland County put it, I'm afraid we've kind of outed that particular colleague, "I work alone. I'm in an information desert. So being connected to this new network means a lot to me." I hope you all come away from today's discussion with new connections, new information, new ideas, and a renewed sense of hope about what we can accomplish together to address disparities in education. So I want to thank you for being here. I wish you a very productive afternoon. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our wonderful colleague, the Dean of the School of Education, Diana Hess.
Welcome, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. The School of Education is so pleased to join the UW-Madison Division of Extension in sponsoring this important event Exploring Education Disparities in the State of Wisconsin. It was more than 2 weeks ago that Wisconsin's Superintendent of Public Instruction, Carolyn Stanford Taylor, delivered her first State of the Education address in the Capitol Rotunda. Stanford Taylor, who's an alumna of our School of Education, said, "While we have some of the highest graduation rates, ACT scores, and advanced placement participation in the country, we have not yet fully reconciled that success with the deep and persistent gaps in achievement, access, and opportunity that exist for far too many children in Wisconsin." Indeed, we know that Wisconsin ranks as one of the worst in the nation for the performance disparity between Black and white students on benchmark exams, the likelihood that a Black student will be suspended, and the disparity in graduation rates. For Black men, the statistics are even more devastating. Wisconsin allots more funding for corrections than it does for higher education, and it has the highest percentage of Black men incarcerated in the United States. Now, clearly, these are not new problems, and it's very important to acknowledge and recognize that many of you in this room have been working on how to reduce education disparities in Wisconsin for many, many years. In fact, some of you have devoted your life's work to this cause. However, we know that there's so much more that needs to be done. And for that reason, I am so grateful that you've all come together today to work with one another and talk with one another. Just a few minutes ago, I overheard somebody say, "Well, I've only been here 5 minutes and I already got an idea that's really important that I hadn't heard before." And that's when Carl interrupted. What that indicates to me is that bringing people together from UW-Madison, from across the state, is going to make a real difference, because it's only partnerships that are going to help us solve these persistent problems in the state. Now, there are a few people who have done so much to put this together that I want to acknowledge. The Deputy Director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research, Mariana Castro, has worked very closely with the Associate Dean in the School of Education for Innovation and Partnerships, Richard Halverson. Working with the great team from UW Extension, they've created what looks to me to be quite dynamic in terms of an agenda for the day. Now, there's one thing happening today that I think is really going to be incredibly fruitful, which is that during lunch at your tables, there'll be facilitated discussions. And those discussions will be facilitated by graduate students in the School of Education who participate in a program called the Network Fellows. Now, within the School of Education, we have this organization called the Network. And the purpose of the network is to try to make linkages between faculty and staff and students in the School of Education with groups across the state so we can work together to solve persisting problems. Part of what the network does is has a fellowship program where this year over 100 graduate students are linked to organizations all over the state. Almost always those linkages are based on expertise. Whatever the graduate student is working on is what the organization is focused on. The idea here is to provide the network fellows with an opportunity to work very, very closely with an organization on things that they need, and at the same time to provide the graduate students with some experiences that they otherwise would not have. So today, the network fellows have been prepared to be the facilitators at your tables at lunchtime. So I want to begin by asking the network fellows to just raise your hands for us. And I want you to join me in acknowledging the hard work that they put in to prepare for today. So Carl mentioned that having UW Extension once again be part of the UW-Madison is a real gift. I can tell you that for the School of Education, we are just thrilled. Not only is today an example of the kind of partnerships that can be formed, but what we know is that UW Extension has offices and staff in every county and in 3 tribal nations. And those offices and staff can be something that is a resource for the School of Education as we do work that we want to engage the state with. So I think it's fabulous that UW Extension is back part of UW-Madison. And I'd like to, at this point, introduce the interim dean of Extension, Dr. Carl Martin. Carl and I have worked together very closely for more than a year now, and I want to say that I think he's done an extraordinary job of bringing this very complex organization into another very complex organization. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Carl Martin.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. There we go. I want to make sure everybody's awake out there. The disadvantage of going third is that Carl and Diana have kind of taken a lot of my speaking points, so I'm going to have to wing this a little bit. But I do want to have a sincere thank you to both Provost Schultz and Dean Hess for their support of this event, as well as Chancellor Blank, Matt Merrill, and Carrie Olson. Without them, this would not have been possible. So let's give them all a big round of applause. I also want to express my sincere appreciation to Danielle Harrison Green, Richard Halverson, and Mariana Castro. They've been working on this for over 7 months, so this is not something we just pulled together in a week, as you all know. And I really want to give them my sincere appreciation, and we should give them a big round of applause. So I want to share a few statistics about educational disparities, and this is really kind of to kick off the event and show just how big an issue this is in Wisconsin and nationwide. Across the U.S., about 2.7 million high school suspensions were handed out in the 2015-2016 school year, about 100,000 fewer than 2 years earlier. But the number of students being referred to law enforcement authorities and arrested on school grounds or at school activities increased. About 291,000 such referrals and arrests occurred in 2015-2016 school year, an increase of about 5,000 from 2 years earlier. Black students accounted for 15% of the student body in 2015-2016 school year, but 31% of the arrests. Wisconsin high school students are increasingly diverse. In 2000, 10% of Wisconsin high school graduates were students of color. By 2016, the share had more than doubled to 22%. Of all graduates from Wisconsin high schools, 40% of white graduates enroll in the UW system. Just 25% of Latino graduates and 14% of black graduates enroll in the UW system. The chances that students of color from Wisconsin enroll in the UW system has declined while white rate has held steady. In terms of access to UW system, racial and ethnic inequality is substantial and increasing. Wisconsin's racial disparities of high school graduates is the worst in the nation. I'll say that again. Wisconsin's racial disparities of high school graduates is the worst in the nation. These 3 statistics are indicative of the dire nature of educational disparities in Wisconsin. My hope for today is by coming together, we can accomplish 3 objectives. The first objective, build new partnerships and collaborations with the over 120 individuals in this room. And Carl and Diana had talked about that also. This is a unique opportunity to meet new people, think about new partnerships, new research activities, new educational programming we can do across the state. The second objective is to understand the latest research and information regarding the causes and potential solutions of our educational disparities in Wisconsin and beyond. And the third objective is to start to think innovatively about solutions to make an impact on this issue in Wisconsin and start to formulate next steps to make that happen. We don't want this to be a one and done event. We want this to be the beginning of this group and the campus moving forward on this issue, both here and across the US. I know these are bold objectives, but I challenge each of you in the room today to use this opportunity to move Wisconsin forward on this important issue. I want to thank each of you for participating today and taking time out of your busy schedules to engage with your colleagues on the important issue of educational disparities. Now, I want to turn it over to Dr. Hairston Green, who deserves much of the credit for this event today and pulling all of you in the room. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Hairston Green.
By 2025, students of color are expected to be a majority of high school graduates. African American women are among the most educated in the country. Total white public school enrollment decreased by 12% between 2001 and 2011. Nationwide, districts with the most students of color receive 15% less per student in state and local funding than the whitest districts. Minority students are more likely to be taught by inexperienced teachers than experienced teachers in 33 states. 81.7% of Black students in New York City, for example, attend segregated schools. That means less than 10% are white. In 2011 and 2012, 3 states had more than 50% of their Latino students in segregated schools: in New York City, in California, and in Texas. And as my colleagues shared earlier, Wisconsin is considered one of the worst states for racial disparities and had little improvement since 2013. Thank you, and welcome to this afternoon's campus engagement. I am honored to have had the opportunity to plan this event with my colleagues over the past few months, and hope that the conversations today empower you to move differently, inspire you to ask more questions, and excite you about the possibilities of what can be achieved together. As the Institute Director of Human Development and Relationships with the Division of Extension and a member of the largest body of community educators in the country, which includes 113 land-grant institutions located in every state, including the Mariana Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, Alaska, the Virgin Islands, and Hawaii, we are uniquely positioned to support a global imperative to close the opportunity gaps that exist within the borders of the United States and the walls of our academic campuses from preschool to post-secondary education. While the Division of Extension has 6 fantastic institutes that span the reach of all 72 counties in Wisconsin through services provided by the Institutes of Positive Youth Development, Health and Well-Being, Natural Resources, and Community Development, and the Institute of Agriculture. I currently lead this amazing Institute of Human Development and Relationship, and we reach 42 counties with 38 county educators distributed across the state, 3 program managers, and 7 state specialists, integrated and non-integrated, and we meet the needs and change the lives of limited access families every day for more than 100 years. The mission of our institute is to facilitate and develop research-based educational processes and programs in Wisconsin for individuals, families, and communities. We learn from our communities, support capacity building, and foster policy, systems, and environmental changes while addressing family engagement and relationships, financial security, and resiliency through the lifespan. Our institute supports hundreds of programs, projects, collaborations, and initiatives. And some of our programs are showcased here today, which includes Literacy Link, fostering positive literacy-based interactions between young children and their justice-involved parents and caregivers, creating environments that nurtures children's language and literacy development during jail visits and beyond, and that's led by Mary Huser. Raising a Thinking Child, a scientifically tested program for parents of children ages 4 to 7. This program trains parents to teach their children how and not what to think. Our Division of Extension educators work directly with the author, Dr. Myrna Shore, to update and adapt the program specifically for Wisconsin families, and that's led by Sue Allen. Digital Parenting, Parenting Behind the Behavior, is a weekly Facebook Live series taking parenting and child development questions and provides actionable ideas for parents related to the topics supported by research-based information. The videos are short 3 to 5 minute positive invitations to a wide variety of parents and caregivers to learn more about parenting, child relationships, the university, and extension, and that's led by Anna Clarkson. Additionally, this year, our institute has taken on a new focus by implementing a statewide fatherhood initiative led by Maggie Carr in collaboration with the Urban League. Research shows that fathers' involvement, custodial or non-custodial, enhances their children's emotional development and health, reduce the chances of problems such as depression and acting out, and most importantly, has an impact on children's academic success. While there may be a few of you in this space who questioned if you should attend, if you had anything to offer or to the conversation at all, what value you bring to the table, I say that if you ever stepped foot on an academic campus as a student, a teacher, a parent, an advocate, a stakeholder, or a service provider, your voice matters. Your presence is significant, your ideas are valuable, and your experiences, whether good or bad, are unique. You are here today because what happens to our children and these learning institutions has a significant impact on all of us, our communities, our environment, our economy, our safety, and our health. One of the most significant impacts that education has on society is that it gives the people the skills they need to compete in the global market. By increasing awareness and concern, education can encourage people to reduce their impact on the environment through more efficient use of energy and resources, especially in a place where there is scarcity. A country's economy becomes more productive as the proportion of educated workers can more efficiently carry out tasks that require literacy and critical thinking. Joyce Epstein, director of the Center on School, Family, and Community Partnerships and professor of education in the Johns Hopkins University School of Education, suggests that having a strong school community and parent partnership not only impacts what happens with the child before school, but also after school. And health economists argue that better educated people are more likely to choose healthier lifestyles. In fact, research shows that people of higher educational background are on average less likely to smoke, abuse alcohol, and will exercise more, eat healthier foods, and have more frequent health checks than the average population. This is an exciting opportunity for the School of Education and the Division of Extension to share their ideas, innovation, and passion to shifting the narrative that families, specifically those of color in Wisconsin, have shared. From protesting, I hope you didn't relocate here with your children because the schools are the worst place to educate students of color, to a new narrative. Welcome to Wisconsin. Your child will prosper and thrive and have all of the opportunities available to them in order for them to be successful contributing members of society. Today will include presentations from 3 scholars and leaders who will address teacher shortage, segregation and mass incarceration, as well as issues impacting families of color and population patterns. We will follow up with an open panel discussion and then break out into our tabletop discussions that will allow for us to drill down more on the issues that interest you the most. We only ask for your full participation, your transparency, your truth, and your willingness to own your own biases and acknowledge your own privilege. I want to introduce to you 3 fantastic panelists today that will kick off this meaningful dialogue as you start thinking about how you can contribute to change this narrative and who in this room would you like to connect with to take action. Our first panelist will be Mr. John Ashley. Mr. John Ashley has been executive director of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards since September 2005. Ashley graduated from Harvard College and did his graduate work at the Northwestern University and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He serves on the Wisconsin PK through 16 Leadership Council, Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association Board of Control, Department of Public Instruction's Collaborative Council, Wisconsin Higher Education Business Roundtable, and the Advisory Board of Wisconsin Operation Military Kids. Ashley is the secretary of the Wisconsin School Attorneys Association, the WASB Insurance Plan, and the National School Board Association Center for Education Advisory Board. He is a member of the Governor's Task Force on Education and the Governor's Early Childhood Advisory Council. Please give Mr. John Ashley a round of applause.
Good morning. And thank you, Dean Hess and Dean Martin, as well as Dr. Hairston Green. This is a unique opportunity for me to speak to a group of academics. That's not my day job. But I'm really happy to hear about the collaboration between the UW Extension and the UW system. That can only mean good things for our state. I'm lucky to be able to represent all 421 public school districts in the state of Wisconsin, and I know that the planners of this event had no idea that this week is actually School Board Appreciation Week. So, thank you for that. The job of school board member is not easy. I'm looking at one of our members. I won't point her out, but they do very, very important work on behalf of our kids. And this opportunity to talk about the hard work of school boards around serving kids is why I feel like this is just a unique opportunity for me to be here. I want to start with equity, because we've heard some interesting statements, and I'm in agreement with the people that have spoken before me, but I also have to be very candid about the perception of the word equity outside of the city of Madison. There is a perception when you talk about equity in our state that you're only focusing in on subpopulations of color. Well, the reality is that when we talk about equity as school board members and we're representing students throughout this state, we want equity to mean the necessary resources for all of our students. In our association, we adopted an equity statement. This was not easy for us to do. What we wanted our members to understand is, even if you were in northern Wisconsin or in southwestern Wisconsin and you had no African American students or no Latino students, that you still needed to be concerned about equity for the students in your district. In other words, socioeconomic issues, serving students with disabilities, serving students whose first language is not English. There is no district in our state that doesn't grapple with the issue of equity. In fact, we say in school boards that we talk about equality as making sure all of our kids have shoes, but equity would mean that the shoes fit. We want our school districts to be committed to the idea that the resources that their students need to be successful are there for them. It's not an easy discussion. In our state, you know the politics of supporting education really requires us as educators, as parents, as community members to put our kids first. So I think that when we think about, as an association, when we got to this point where we were able to say, we affirm in our actions that each student can, will, and shall learn, we recognize that based on factors including, but not limited to, disability, race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, not all students receive equitable educational opportunities. Educational equity is the intentional allocation of resources, instruction, and opportunities to meet the specific identified needs of students and staff in the local community, and this was approved by our board of directors last year. This is our commitment as an association to ensure that all of the students in our state get the educational resources that they need to be successful. If I talk about the impact of the teacher shortage on student equity issues, the very short answer is it's a devastating impact on our students. If we don't have enough teachers, then we aren't able to provide the necessary services that they need. And I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly because it's been stated, but the information is very clear. It is harmful for us to have turnover in our classrooms. It impacts staff cohesion and culture. It most definitely impacts student achievement. And replacing teachers is expensive. And it has an impact on some of our most challenged school districts. So what is happening in the teacher labor market in Wisconsin and in the USA? Frankly, folks, it's not good. It's not going in the right direction. Statewide, there were 4,604 teachers working in the 2014 school year who did not return to the profession for the 2015-16 school year. Nationally, 16% of public school teachers leave their individual schools annually. Since 2009-2010, the number of teachers in the state has actually decreased, while the number of students enrolled has gone up. Retention, we understand. I'm not going to stand up here and represent school boards and say that we don't have some responsibility for what's going on in our schools. We as school boards have to acknowledge we have to do a better job of retaining the teachers that we do have. We are not in a situation where we can afford to lose good teachers. And what are we doing as school districts? We are flying the plane, folks. We are operating with students and with teachers every day. Our members go in with the idea, can we make a difference in the lives of kids in Wisconsin? And the research indicates that between 40 and 50% of teachers leave the profession in the first 5 years. 4 years ago, 33% had left the profession. These are some scary statistics here. We've had a decline, 37% since 2010. Teachers completing their teacher license programs, down 29%. And we know there are a lot of reasons why teachers might leave. Salary, family, demands, expectations, distance to home. We understand those reasons. I'm here to ask for the assistance of all of the UW system and extension. We want to get a sense of, from a strategic, data-driven perspective, why do young people decide not to go into education? We have the anecdotal explanations. We know that they will say, well, it's the salary, I don't want to work 9 to 5, I want flexibility. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you're going to teach, you're going to be working from 8 to 3. That's what our kids need. But what I would love to have is more data on why individual students in your colleges decide that education is not for them, so that we can solve the problem. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have teachers in front of our students, we can't do our job. I mean, it's absolutely that simple. And we can talk about the reasons why. I want to focus, though, on the potential for new partnerships. That's what I'm hearing today, that between extension and the system, that we want to be collaborating. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. I don't know a better return on investment than investing in our kids. And so to be able to do that for all of our kids, it means that we have to address the teacher shortage and the teacher retention issues that's facing our state. Thank you.
It's actually pretty scary walking up those steps. Okay, so our next presenter, Dr. Armando Ibarra, Dr. Armando Ibarra has a bachelor's degree in sociology and Spanish, master's degree in public administration, and a PhD in political science from the University of California, Irvine. Armando joined the School for Workers faculty in January 2011. Dr. Ibarra has extensive and diverse teaching, research, and organizing experience. His research in fields of specialization are Chicano, Latino working communities, adult education on issue of diversity in the workplace, international labor migration, leadership development, organizing workplaces, and applied research. He's also the chair for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension Latinx Coalition. His applied research includes Latino Wisconsin, Needs Assessment and Family Integration Study, University of Wisconsin Extension, 2015-2018, Economic Programming and Facilities Needs Assessment Study of South Madison, Madison College, 2013-2014, and Low Wage Workers in Milwaukee, Life Narratives, Open Places, Milwaukee, 2013, as well as the Rubber Stamp Process, Broken Governance in the Planning and Development and How Communities Can Regain a Voice, Garden Grove, 2011. Please give Dr. Armando Ibarra a round of applause.
Buenos días. Beautiful. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here to be able to present on some applied research work that I've done for extension since my time here. What I will be talking about briefly is a research project that I took out within the Division of Extension between 2014 to about 2017, and continues to this day in its application form in the Latino Task Force that I will be talking about in a bit. So this is what I wanted to talk about, but I got 10 minutes, right? And I really wanted to focus on inequality, and inequality as a measure of disparate outcomes of our systems for people of color and other folks. But what I get to talk to you about is the bottom 3 points. Why and how we undertook this study, in this community-based research study, lessons that we learned from people's lived realities, and the application of this knowledge, this applied portion to applied research. Here it is, my study design, a conceptual map of what we carried out within the Division of Extension to learn about Latino families and how they're integrating into localized regions across the state of Wisconsin. Each one of these areas is a class in itself, and probably a curriculum in community-based participant research. So just know that a lot of work went into the implementation and carrying out of this research. And in the end, we were able to engage with 368 individuals from across the state of Wisconsin in a mixed method research design to learn from their lived realities about how they're doing within their localized homes, but also to learn about what their expectations are, what their hopes are, how they're incorporating and or assimilating into their regions and what have you. And then we have the application of knowledge part, right? We, from this work, we were able to create a Latino task force, which I'll talk a little bit more in a little bit. But also there's publications. We're also engaged in those broad scholarly debates about incorporation and the importance of applied research to this conversation. And in the end, we seek institutional transformation, right? We seek that this knowledge that's being produced alongside these folks that participated in the research will have some sort of impact on the institution itself and how it carries out its message in programming and other initiatives. So early on, I partnered up with the Applied Population Laboratory of UW Extension, now Madison. And there's some folks here from the Applied Pop Lab, and I really want to put their name out there because they really help shape the narrative of what it is that we're trying to do. And they gave us one of these teaching tools that I use when I talk about it. So what I have here is actually the data that, in collaboration with the Population Laboratory, we put together. It's a narrative that I take with me anytime that I do any type of public engagement, including with elected officials at the state capitol or, community centers or in libraries. And basically what it outlines is that in Wisconsin, we're undergoing a similar demographic transformation as the rest of the country is. This demographic shift rooted in Latino population increases is taking place in Wisconsin as well. We're no longer a state that's immune to this demographic shift, and it's in concise formats that we're able to use this as a teaching tool. The second teaching tool that we have along with this is a 4-page synopsis of our research and findings, right? And within this 4-page synopsis, we have the major findings, we have recommendations for the institution itself, and we also have assessments of the incorporation that these families are undergoing in their regionalized homes. Important is that it's something that's digested and people can read while you're having a conversation with regards to the larger transformation and needs of this population. So these are 2 teaching tools that I take with me anytime I present on this work. So just in general, these are the major barriers that Latino families are facing across the state. Each one of these, I would love to get into in depth with it, but I want to focus on immigration status and immigration status of families in general, because it becomes part of the broad conversation about Latino integration and/or incorporation. And when we talk about immigration status and the way it impacts family and youth, if we use the 8% of all students in the country that have at least one parent who's unauthorized, is an immigrant who's unauthorized, then we see that in the state of Wisconsin, there's about 900,000 students in the K-12 system. That measure would give us about 72,000 students who have at least one parent that's unauthorized. It's a really important piece of information because it gives us insight into some of the lived realities of these families and the anxieties that are being produced, not only for the student, but for entire communities. So one of the measures that we use is this idea of aspiration within the study. And this is just one of the many measures that we use within the study to assess incorporation and integration. And so now I'm going to use my other teaching tool, right? So one of the key findings was that Latino parents held high levels of optimism and aspiration for their children's future. In almost every case, including for those with undocumented children, Latino parents felt that their children had a good chance at achieving a promising future if they were successful in school. Immigrant parents express a sense of a personal sacrifice for their children. Many consider themselves to be a sort of sacrificial generation and feel that they must do whatever necessary to help their children get ahead. Parents express concern that if they do not sacrifice their lives, their children will suffer to a fate similar to theirs and be relegated to life dictated by low-paying jobs at the margins of society and suffer a loss of dignity. And here I have some quotes from these families that I'm not going to read, but you can see that the hopes are in status adjustment and in the hope of that education provides the families as well. So part of the applied research model is to actually apply the research, right? So applied research has a shelf life. So we produce a report, we bring the findings, and with the leadership at the Division of Extension, we were able to come together and go across the state, and invite folks onto this Latino task force that we've developed that's been working for over a year, assessing the report, assessing the division, and assessing the needs of their organizations and communities. What I have here is two folks that are part of this task force, and there's other folks in the room as well that are part of this task force that I want to thank. But we have Ananda Mirili, right, who's one of our elected officials and a consultant with the Department of Public Instruction, and Jose Martinez, who is the vice president, one of the vice presidents at UMOS, the United Migrant Opportunity Services, which is one of the largest Latino service organizations in the Midwest. And that is something that we have at the table, that type of conversations, those types of interactions that we're developing that we hope are going to be able to put together professional development for the Division of Extension and also bring in the voices of communities from across the state. This is statewide, folks. We have people from Fond du Lac, we have people from Trempealeau, we have folks from Milwaukee, we have folks from Waukesha, folks from here in Madison, but this is an urban, rural, and statewide task force that's come together that's carrying out the work of the research that we conducted. And just really briefly, what we covered to try to put this puzzle together, what I briefly covered was the community-based participatory research project, a project that's applied and has a shelf life that we're carrying out the work right now. I showed you the teaching and outreach tools developed from the CBPR to have discourses and narratives across the state that are based on solid research is something that was really important when we've engaged in public comments with regards to our work. I laid out just general barriers to positive integration and focused on immigration status. Driver's license and in-state tuition are two of the most important issues for the Latino community in the entire state. Status adjustment at the national level is the #1 issue that comes from this research and others with regards to these families. And the Latino Task Force, which is a practical outcome of this research to continue to carry on the findings and to implement those findings. Thank you all, appreciate it.
Our final speaker, Orlando F. Jackson, is the Venus Distinguished Professor of Higher Education, Department Chair of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis, and the Director and Chief Research Scientist, Wisconsin's Equity and Inclusion Laboratory, WELAB, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Fueled by more than 125 publications, Professor Jackson's research on hiring practices, career mobility, workforce diversity, and workplace discrimination has evolved into his focus on organizational disparities. He has authored or edited 6 books, including Measuring Glass Ceiling Effects, Opportunities and Challenges, and Ethnic and Racial Administrative Diversity, Understanding Work-Life Realities and Experiences in Higher Education. Professor Jackson has established multiple groundbreaking initiatives that include serving as founding executive of the Center for African American Research and Policy in 2005, founding co-director of the Asa G. Hilliard III and Barbara A. Sizemore Research Course on African Americans and Education held at the American Educational Research Association since 2007, founding director of Wisconsin's Equity and Inclusion Laboratory in 2010, and co-founder of the International Colloquium on Black Males in Education in 2011. He has also received external funding to develop the Beyond the Game program and the National Study of Intercollegiate Athletics transformational projects related to the experiences of student athlete and staff in the intercollegiate athletics. Please give a warm round of applause for Dr. Orlando Jackson.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to share a few minutes of your time to talk about disrupting educational disparities, segregation, and mass incarceration. Hidden battlegrounds for Black males. For about 20 years, I've been captured and baffled by this diagram or this image. And I've been captured by it not because this represents my ability or inability to retire, right? That this might look like some of our retirement accounts. But this actually represents the percent representation of black males across the educational pipeline, starting at high school completion, going into college participation. And what this has sort of allowed me to think about over 20 years in conjunction with other studies is that there's something about our structured educational organizations that disrupt and cause a disservice into the interests and aspirations of black males. If you look at the data that talks about the performance and aspirations going into first grade, and then you look at these data about those that want to go to college, but get to college and find themselves weeded out, it suggests that as an organization and as an employment industry, education, we have not really put much consideration into what we are doing in this regard as a organizational unit, but we do discuss the individual failures that result from this particular reality. Being in the state of Wisconsin, it also is natural for me and others to think about how does this play out here? And you've heard a good bit of information about that in this regard. The Schott Foundation put out reports for a considerable amount of time, bringing great attention to our performance along with others in our country about how males and black males in particular perform as it relates to educational gap. With that said, if you do look closely and pay really good attention to what we are talking about with some of the data today, is you'll begin to recognize that we're not just observers. Wisconsin becomes ground zero for some of these challenges. We hear about these reports talking about this is one of the worst places in the nation for blacks to live, particularly black professionals. But if we also look more carefully at the data, we'll begin to recognize that Milwaukee is a place that, when you look at the data, it is definitely a place we should be paying closer attention to, and in fact, being much more a set of advocates. So why is this the case? There's been some discussion about educational disparities already, but I want to highlight a few things. About 10% of the black students in Milwaukee public schools are proficient in language arts, and less than 10% are proficient in math, which gives us about a 35% gap and then almost under a 30% gap in these spaces as it relates to their white counterparts. This is even more stark when we look at the data for black males versus white males. And there's good reasons from data and policy that we know. We have some legislation in place and have had in place that creates these conditions that we need to be mindful of, not only as researchers, but also contributors to this state. Secondly, funding disparities. You can't get away from the challenges associated with the inability to spend the same amount of money per pupil, right? And if you don't have those resources, how do you address that, and are there innovative ways for that to occur? Then segregation. When we function as a state, oftentimes it's lost upon our discussions that Milwaukee is regularly identified as the most segregated city in the country, not just in the state, but in the country, right? And someone coming from the Deep South, growing up in the Deep South, and for Madison to rank this high on sorts of disparities is surprising, But it's also baffling when we have these broader discussions where people can't really understand how does that play out on the ground? How is it possible that Madison, Wisconsin, or Wisconsin is the worst place for someone to be living and to be black? That's a hard context to take in. But what occurs here from this being one of the most segregated cities, or the most segregated city in the country, is that 3 out of 4 black residents would have to move to a completely different place if we were to create a racially integrated neighborhoods in Milwaukee. 3 out of 4 would have to move from where they are. 1 out of 3, and because of that, it impacts and creates a default segregated schools. And so 1 out of 3 Milwaukee Public School students are in a highly intense segregated school. And that impacts teacher representation. 16% of the teachers in our state are black. Less than 4% are black males, right? This adds to the conditions of learning, opportunities, curriculum, classroom, and the additional types of support that students may need to come in contact to. We have a lot of work to do as a state. And then mass incarceration. This one sometimes gets dropped off the list, but quite frankly, it is one that plays out in a very critical way and impacts those who are still in our formal school system, and also creates the reality that we are educating a large number of black males who are incarcerated. And are we paying close attention to that? 1 in 8 black men of working age in Milwaukee have been in a correctional facility. And it's not of equal distribution. Right. Over 50% are between the ages of 30 and 40. And 62% live in 1 zip code. Right, so this is not only, should be alarming on a large scale level, but there's some clearly identifiable places where either, how does this happen is the question, right? How does 1 zip code get 62%, right? I mean, there's no natural distribution of this in any form of the concept. So this mass incarceration is kind of the third reason. And we've used these issues to frame up the theme for the International Colloquium Black Males in Education, which will be occurring in our great state of Milwaukee next month. This event has moved across the world over the last 8 years. And the locations are selected not because they're beautiful. Yes, Bermuda's beautiful. Jamaica and some other, they're beautiful places. But each of these places had a very different set of challenges that we knew very little about from a research standpoint, a policy standpoint, and wanted to be able to improve the type of practice and research that was occurring. And what Milwaukee did, because Milwaukee may not be as sexy as some of these other places, is that it eliminates the ability to ignore that in a country we have these types of issues going on in a single place. But the hidden battlegrounds piece is that you are hard-pressed to be in a discussion around the challenges of males of color, even when we had the My Brother's Keeper initiative and all these other things that had the country thinking differently about it, that anyone ever resolved to say, we got a national problem in Milwaukee, which we do. And we are hard-pressed to have many discussions here in Madison in full recognition that we live in this state. And we have these stark issues, lived experiences going on in Milwaukee. But next month, we have 5 days of programming set up to where we're working with policymakers, where we identify 50 of the policy influencers who are in the best position to impact this. That occurs on Monday at the Policy Roundtable. On Tuesday, we have community-facing programs that go into schools to encourage youth to think about college. We work with college students also in a graduate school academy where we kind of disrupt certain myths about graduate and postgraduate school. We also have a Black Female Forum that provides a full day of programming for our counterparts who have come and been a part of our journey over the 8 years so that they can have a space to talk about challenges that are very specific to them. And then also that evening, we have something called the Community Conversations. This is for those individuals that aren't thinking about going to college. They aren't going to be invited to the policy tables, and they're disinterested in sitting through 3 days worth of research that's going to start on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, but they are in the everyday challenge of working for those that they care about. And so that particular community conversations is dedicated to real community folks who aren't going to find themselves engaged in any of the other spaces. On Wednesday, we begin our colloquium where we have we've convened top researchers from across the world on Black males, education, and we also have high impact practitioners featured as well as policymakers who are all committed to trying to address some of these particular challenges. I will simply stop there and say thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you once again to our panelists, Mr. John Ashley, Dr. Armando Barrow, and Dr. Jolando Jackson. If you can with me, please acknowledge them once again with your round of applause. For the next few minutes, we're going to open it up for Q&A, and we're going to have our co-moderators facilitate that Q&A, Dr. Richard Halverson and Dr. Mariana Castro.
Hi, thank you very much. This was inspiring and it was very exciting. My question is for Mr. John Ashley. And I was wondering, you left us with a wonderful challenge, a call to partner between the community and the university. So I was wondering if you could elaborate more into what would meaningful and authentic partnerships would look like between the university and the community, specifically.
Thank you. School boards, we're every day running our districts. And so one of the things as we look at equity around the state is ensuring, oh, there we go, thank you. One of the things that we have to grapple with is where are we going to get future teachers, and will they, really, to what Dr. Jackson said, will they look like the students in front of them? And so a real concern that school boards have is around how are you attracting in higher education young people to consider teaching as a career? We're in a post-Act 10 world in which I think teaching as a profession got demonized, and so we have teachers reluctant to tell their own children to follow them into teaching. That's going to affect our ability to be representative in the classroom. So if the university, with all of its great researchers, could sort of point the spotlight on what are some of the concerns that your students are bringing forth as reasons why they don't want to pursue education, because I think the anecdotal explanations that we on the hiring side might come up with may not be the reality. And everybody's talking about making database decisions. Well, I think school boards, school districts, we want to know.
Dr. Ibarra, thank you for your comments and thank you for your commitment to making your research accessible to people in the audience and in the communities. I was interested in you studied immigrant families across the state. Did you notice differences in the concerns or the interest between families who are in urban areas and rural areas? And if so, could you speak to that a little bit about some of those differences?
Yeah, there's absolute differences between urban and rural areas. So when we look at a place like Milwaukee, we know that we've had a Latino or mostly Mexican-American community there that's been there for about 100 years. You can live in the south side of Milwaukee and not learn English and get by just fine, right? With Spanish, you can get all the services that you need. You can engage in community building. You can worship. That's not so the case in a place, let's say, like Greene County, right? In Greene County, I use Greene County as an example because in Greene County, there's almost as many Latinos in Greene County as there are, or Brown County, as there are in Madison, in Dane County, which is really interesting. So, for example, some of our focus groups were had in the Sturgeon Bay area, and in people's homes, right? And these folks, many of them work on, for example, the dairy farms, and are recent arrivals. And for these recent arrivals to be able to integrate into their localized communities there, it becomes really difficult. First, you don't have an understanding of the culture, you don't have any mastery of the language, and more often than that, if you're a newcomer living in these areas, your immigration status is in question as well. So you're isolated. You don't have access to the same access that you would in Milwaukee or even Madison. Madison's done a very wonderful job of creating welcoming spaces, where, as you would, for example, in Sturgeon Bay. So, we spoke with a family, a recent arrival family from one of the Central American countries that's currently sending folks, and they were having a very difficult time integrating in just even there locally. So yes, there's very real differences and very real consequences for family structures between a place like Milwaukee and a place like Sturgeon Bay.
Thank you.
Dr. Gerlando Jackson, the issue around Black males and the inequality in education, it seems it's been researched now for decades, and practitioners have been struggling on this for decades. I continue to think about partnerships, like we seem to be working in separate tracks. So I'm wondering if you could point to either some models or systems that you've seen work in partnering together universities and practitioners that you could talk. I know that you're going to give the real answer at the conference coming up in Milwaukee, but if you could give us.
Unfortunately, there aren't as many good examples as you would hope, right? Because the challenge becomes, creating. So the challenge there really lies with even some of the partnerships we have in place when we don't look at those challenges, right? So if we think about schools of education working with school districts and researchers interfaced in that, it's just, unfortunately, we have these structures that can prevent innovation, good work. We might not even have the incentives in place for these types of partnerships to occur. The places where you're most likely to find of greater success is where there's some local interest in place, and those partnerships are naturally occurring from the ground roots up. And it's limited, unfortunately, and the access is also limited. So it's certainly an opportunity. I think that Wisconsin could become one of the states that decide that this is a priority and make it one, and create the structure or somehow articulate one on top of our existing structures to make these collaborations a bit easier. But I think most of us in the room realize how hard it is to collaborate cross K-12, higher ed, researchers, practitioners. But certainly if you have a committed interest and the support in place, we found some areas of success, and I just think that Wisconsin could lead the way with the solution as we are kind of leading the way with the problem.
We'd like to open the question up to the audience, so just raise your hand if you got a question and just introduce yourself and then ask your question. So do you have anybody who'd like to
Is there
volunteer?
a question? Can you raise your hand? Oh, okay.
What's up, y'all? My name is Damon Hill. I'm a master's student in educational policy studies, and I have a question for Dr. Jackson. I want to say this as nicely as I can. So for you in particular, how would you respond to the concern around young black girls' experiences not being legible when we do tend to put a particular focus, or that's the argument sometimes, that we put an overt focus on black boys and black men?
Was that legible? You said legible? You know, when we started the International Colloquium on Black Males, we would get some of that type of murmur of our counterparts. You know, the challenge is, quite frankly, I don't study black females. And, you know, we've certainly in recent years worked on developing collaborations that have led to the Black Female Forum, right, which is creating a type of space. But to assume that everyone should focus on every population and be apologetic for not doing that, I think is a bit unreasonable, although that does occur, right? But no, I don't really see that type of litmus test being held for anyone who has a population for which they study or advocate as well. So, I mean, I'm sure those concerns are probably there and will continue to be there, and very supportive of the fact that there are a set of challenges that black women and girls go through, and we've certainly created space for that to be addressed within our context as well. But I'm not an expert in that space, and do believe that someone that is could certainly do more and you know, move that agenda. So that would be my response. Is it's, you know, it's not my space, but it very much is warranted, along with a whole host of other challenges and lived experiences.
Could I just add I think it's a great question, and our school districts are as committed to our female students as our male students. And while Dr. Jackson has done an incredible job of focusing on black males, be aware that in Milwaukee and in Madison and Green Bay, all around the state, we aren't leaving female students out of the equation. We're trying to ensure that they have the same opportunity to study STEM, to have the same opportunities that male students have. I think it's a great question, but I don't want you to leave thinking that we're leaving women on the side. K-12 districts are completely committed to the idea that all of their students are going to be served, male and female.
Yeah, thanks again for the panel. Is this okay? Can you guys hear me? So I'm managing director of the University Alliance. We manage a program where local governments basically ask us for help, and we try to convince faculty basically to take on projects in real world contexts. And one of the biggest pushbacks I think I get from faculty, and I'm kind of wondering maybe if this is Ibarra and Jackson, if y'all can talk about this, is that the questions that are posed in the world of praxis, I guess, or practice, don't always make really interesting research questions, and don't always translate well into what the incentive structure is for the university, which is to publish, publish, publish. So I'm wondering you all's perspectives on how do you kind of bridge that gap of questions that are both interesting in practice that might also have, I don't know, kind of cachet in your own research communities.
It is a system flaw, right? We do have this dilemma of the type of research that is revered and rewarded. And then we also have this other dynamic around effort report and time, right? So, I mean, perhaps a university could think differently about when you give your time for efforts like this and it's not a part of your standard duties? Like, how's this accounted for? How's it budgeted? You know, I think that there's a great deal to look at in this particular space. Probably 5 years ago in the We Lab, we attempted to develop a network that would provide these type of services and ran into all kinds of hurdles because I mean, there's service that you can provide to the community is accounted for in certain ways, but the moment you start spending resources, where do those resources come from, right? And that's part of the challenge, right? When you work with the community, you often not only come to the table with the time, but if there's monies that need to be spent, where do those monies come from? And it becomes a challenge. You know, so I think you point to something that is very difficult to address, and most of us that had figured it out, you find a way to fund it, and you do it because it matters to you, and then you do the additional work that's necessary for your colleagues to find value in your work, and then you do this work because you feel that you're going to make a difference in the community.
Yes. Well, that's why I chose Wisconsin as my new home, was extension and the ability to engage in this type of research that's community-based, community-focused, and those are the questions that are developed alongside with community members. So, you know, the Wisconsin idea in practice and in action was one of the draws for me and my family to choose this as a state. When we engaged in the Latino family needs assessment and integration study, we developed our study instruments with practitioners, right? Our one-on-one interview instruments, our focus group instruments, our survey that we got out, we developed it as part of the process alongside folks that are working with the families that we're going to be assessing and engaging with. That's the power and that's the reach of extension, is that for us to be able to get an assessment of the Latino community across the state and then to put that praxis, right, that idea of theory and practice and research all coming together, in our situation it materialized in the form of the Latino Task Force, which is now tasked with creating conversation within the institution about needs of Latinos across the state, right? So we have stakeholders, we have folks from the university, faculty and staff that are coming together quarterly to discuss what it is that research and what it is that community and this building together can be used to institutionally change the division of extension and the greater UW community, but also the impacts that it has on their local communities as well. So when you have folks from Fond du Lac that are coming here, and when you have folks from Milwaukee that are coming here, when you have folks from, let's say, Trumpealo County that are coming here, we're all actively engaging in this knowledge production that translate into programming for our communities across the state, which is working towards a better Wisconsin, in my humble estimation.
Yeah. I'm Reginald Nezo from International Partnership for Inclusive Education and Development. The three presentations, thank you for the presentations, each one of you. The three presentations are quite informative in terms of highlighting the problems, particularly Dr. Jackson's problem on zero, ground zero. But my question is there or are there any specific policy responses, policy and practice responses to the problem, particularly with regard to teacher preparation? Because some of the problems as presented appear to have some issues to do with how teaching is done in the classroom and the climate, because particularly Dr. Jackson highlighted issues relative to structure and organization. Now, do we have anything with regard to process of teaching which may be addressed effectively with something unique regarding how teachers are prepared to deal with these issues, in response to these issues. In your research, Dr. Jackson, have you seen any model of teacher preparation that is specifically designed to deal with ground zero issues? Thank you.
I agree that many of these challenges are solvable. You just have to have a nimble organization. I have a colleague at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte where they've created a set of programs to focus on preparing teachers to work in urban spaces. They've also have a commitment to increasing the number of Black males in the teacher workforce. And it's something that's driven by the passion of a particular faculty member that the institution recruited, brought there, provided the infrastructure, sort of kind of created an opportunity to where some of the initiatives you've set up, I don't know how we would do that here, but they figuring it out, and as a result, they're very attractive location for people to go get their doctorate degree, get their teacher education certification, because they've created a space that's very hard to find in most places. And I think there are many other institutions that could choose to do it. I mean, there's nothing that the University of North Carolina, Charlotte has figured out that none of these other institutions could emulate or, quite frankly, do better.
We're going to have one more question, and then we're going to break for lunch. I'll give directions about lunch.
Diego Roman, Bilingual Education, the School of Education. Armando, you showed this graph of the different, how Wisconsin is reflecting the demographic changes around the country. So I am coming from Texas and from California. I was wondering if in the two studies that you showed, you also differentiated by Latino and Latinx families that have been here for generations, the newly arrived immigrants, and if there are specific centers or areas of the state that show these different needs assessment that you mentioned. As for example, when the language factor is part of the services that perhaps newly arrived families need versus other type of services or supports that families who are Latinx but have been here for 3-4 generations need or present.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there's approximately 400,000 plus Latinos in the state of Wisconsin, about 7% of the population itself, right? Of this 400,000, about half of them were born in about a quarter of them are foreign born, right? Meaning they were born in another country. And so what you have is really a situation right now in the state of Wisconsin. Well, I forgot to mention that the majority of those that are born in the States were actually born in Wisconsin. So when you make this part of the conversation and the narrative, it becomes different, right? So more than likely when you meet a person that self-identifies as a Latino, right? Because we know that Latinos are very diverse, and it's a label that is being right now challenged and changing. When you meet a person in Wisconsin that self-identifies as a Latino, guess what, folks? They're probably around the age of 25, about 20 years younger than the non-Latinos. They're probably born in the U.S. and more than likely were born right here in Wisconsin, right? This is talking about that generational settlement and generational just folks that are already in Wisconsin. About 10% of all births in the state of Wisconsin are to Latina mothers. So when we look about this demographic transformation that we're undergoing in Wisconsin, as in the rest of the country, we look to the birth rate within the Latino community. Now, going to the question of long-standing communities, people that we talked to in the study, for example, from Racine, we have people that are retired in Wisconsin that were actually born in Wisconsin now, right? So we're into that second and third generation Latino families. In places like Milwaukee, we have those real old families in Milwaukee that would hear when there was an industrial base in Milwaukee that attracted labor to those communities. What we have in Milwaukee now are what are known like donut communities, right? Where you have a mass exodus of manufacturing from the centers of cities, and the people that leave can leave, and it's usually along racial and ethnic lines, and the people that stay are the people that stay. So when we have those dynamics, and we look at today, we can look at a place like Arcadia, right? In Arcadia, we have you know, a little town of about 3,000 people that's probably 80% Latino, mostly newcomers. What's in Arcadia? Ashley Furniture, right? People are moving there to work in that type of industry. And it's estimated that there's an additional 3,000 Latinos that aren't counted there. So we have about 6,000 Latinos in the area that's seeing a drastic demographic change there. One other final point, and then I'll get off. You know, when we look at the numbers at, for example, enrollments here in Dane County, we see a similar pattern with this demographic shift that's taking place across the state, but that connects more to the Southwest, places like Texas, California, Arizona, where in Madison, in our school district here in Dane County, there is no longer, we have what's known as a minority-majority school district. That meaning that there is no single ethnic or racial groups that has 50% plus of the student population, right? So we know that in Madison, about 40+% of students are white, but 22% of the overall enrollments in Madison school districts, guess what, are Latino. And guess what, if we use that 0.8%, that 8% number to talk about our Latino student population here, about 2,200 to 2,300 of those students have unauthorized parents, which given our current political climate is something that really impacts their learning on a daily basis.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you guys for thank you for sharing your thoughts with us and your perspectives. I think that this is a really good example of the kind of dialogue that can come forward when we bring our communities together, the UW-Madison, UW Extension, and our state communities. The first thing I'd like to do is ask our graduate students and network fellows to stand up and go get some food. So it's right through those doors and to the left. Let those guys get out first so they can fill their plates and come back to facilitate our dialogue. When the grad students get out the door, then the next thing is for all of you to get up, go to the left, and get some food. Come back to your assigned tables, and then we'll have the discussion start as we're eating. Brooke, do you have no? Do you want to say? No, you don't want to say anything. Okay, so lunchtime. Let the conversation start, and let's move from there. Brooke, do you have something? Super good. Yep. There's a microphone around if you want to use it. Otherwise, just do it. All right.
Hey, good to see you again.
Yes, that was great.